unashamed conversation, said Glenn Close. Good evening and a warm welcome to everyone present here. Today's event, In Conversation with Ms. Daman Singh, is hosted by IQAC and Mata Sundari College for Women's Department of Psychology, University of Delhi. Before we begin, please keep asking your questions in the chat box and we will take them up later. Additionally, please look out for the feedback form at the end of this session. In recent times, mental health has been given equal importance as physical health. This, however, has not always been the case. A huge disparity exists between the perception of the two. The first mental health facility in India was opened in Kilpauk, Madras in 1794 and was called a lunatic asylum. Now there are 47 mental health hospitals in the country. This evolution is rooted in several historical, social, and legal influences, which resulted in many reforms that bring us here to this virtual forum where we'll be talking to Ms. Daman Singh. Today, Gursheel and I, Parneet, will be your host. Over to you, Gursheel.
Thank you, Parneet. Now, I would like to introduce the author of Asylum, The Battle of Mental Health Care in India, Ms. Daman Singh. Welcome, ma'am. Ms. Daman Singh graduated in mathematics from St. Stephen College, Delhi in 1984. She went to the Institute of Rural Management, Anand, for further studies and worked in the field of development for 20 years. She is the author of two previous works of non-fiction, The Last Frontier, People and Forests in Mizoram, 1996, and Strictly Personal, 2014, a memoir of her parents Manmohan Singh and Gursharan Kaur. She has also written three novels, 9 by 9, 2008, The Sacred Grove, 2010, and Kitty's War, 2018. In her book Asylum, Daman Singh provides an account of the history of mental health care and asylums in India since the early 20th century. Healthcare has been reformed with radically altered perception of mental illness. Scientific methods of diagnosis and treatment have paved the way for advancement in the field of mental health care. While many places across the world have welcomed this change and given the same rights to mentally ill, thereby enabling them to have a life of dignity, respect, and meaning, some other places are yet to recognize it. Ma'am has taken the help of archival records, official reports, parliamentary debates, court proceedings, academic journals, and news articles to give us insight of this little-known battle spanning a century and more. Thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out the time to speak with us today. We are really glad to have you here. The floor is all yours. I would again like to welcome you, ma'am. Daman ma'am, can you hear us? I think ma'am is facing some connection issue.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
I'm getting this message saying that the video can't start because the host is not allowing it. So I don't think I can do anything.
Ma'am, now you can try. Ma'am, now you have a right. Now try it again.
No, it doesn't start.
Ma'am, sir, there is a problem related to your system, ma'am.
I don't think so because I've done this before and I never had this problem. So what do we do?
We can start regardless. It's okay.
We just start with the audio,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like I've dressed up for nothing. Okay, so let's just go ahead. Thank you once again for inviting me to this forum. I would like to talk a little bit about my book, Asylum, The Battle for Mental Health Care in India. Now, as you know, in my introduction, I think it was Gursheel who introduced me and mentioned the various books I've written.
Yes, ma'am.
So as you know, I have been writing for the last 20 years or so, and I've always picked up different subjects. whether it's fiction or whether it's non-fiction, but I have tried to pick up subjects which are of some social importance. So quite by accident, I got interested in the subject of mental health care. And as I started reading up, I came across some very interesting books, some very interesting articles. And I came to know that in the 18th century, asylums for the mentally ill were started in India under British rule. So that was really the starting point of my journey in writing this book. So जैसे मैं पढ़ती गई 18th century में क्या हुआ, 19th century में क्या हुआ, तो मुझे फिर जानकारी मिली कि somewhere around the middle of the 19th century, the world started thinking differently about mental illness. तो जो पहले जो ये धारणा थी कि ये एक तरह से श्राप है, ये क्यों होता है, कैसे होता है, किसी को समझ नहीं है. People thought that there was something supernatural involved. इसमें भूत प्रेत का भी प्रभाव माना जाता था. तो ये सब धारणाएं धीरे धीरे कम से कम साइंटिफिक दुनिया से हटने लगी. And people started believing that no, this is an illness. It is an illness that can be treated and it can also be cured. So this belief in various parts of the world led to a reform in what were then called lunatic asylums. And in Britain was then ruling India. So back home in Britain, उन्होंने अपने level पर अपने देश में काफी सुधार किया in the say middle of the 19th century. तो उन्होंने कई नए कानून लाए, प्राइवेट asylums के लिए कानून लाए, पब्लिक asylums के लिए कानून लाए, उन्होंने नई पॉलिसी बनाई, उन्होंने asylums को रेगुलेट करने के लिए नए सिस्टम बनाए. तो उन्होंने काफी हद तक शुरुआत की इस दिशा में कि asylums are not like a prison, they are places to treat patients. पर क्या हुआ कि ब्रिटिश इंडिया में ये सब बेनिफिट्स अभी तक नहीं आए थे. तो we were still sort of living in the older system, जहाँ ट्रीटमेंट और केयर के फैसिलिटीज बहुत ही कम थे. तो now it so happens कि मेरे एक दोस्त ने मुझे कहा कि अगर तुम इसके बारे में ज्यादा जानना चाहती हो तो तुम्हें किताबों में नहीं मिलेगा, because this part of the story was not written in any book. तो उसके लिए मैं गई नेशनल आर्काइव्स ऑफ इंडिया, और शायद आप जानते हो एक बहुत बड़ी पुरानी संस्था है नेशनल आर्काइव्स. Its office is on Janpat, or they have records dating back to even 15th 16th century. और ये सब records हम लोग जाके देख नहीं सकते क्योंकि ये बहुत ही carefully preserved एक किसी कमरे या गोडाउन में रखे हुए होते हैं. So one can just go and look at the catalog and say मुझे ये फाइलें देखनी है, और फिर वो लोग वो फाइलें निकालते हैं. निकालने में भी काफी समय लगता है, ऐसा नहीं कि तुरंत निकल आती है. And then the file comes and you can read it in front of them and then you can take notes. So 1-2 महीने के लिए या 2-3 महीने के लिए मैंने यही काम किया. और इस दौरान फिर मुझे मैंने पाया कि around the year 1900 the British government in India had decided that we must reform the asylums in British India as well. We must try and catch up with the progress that has been made back in England, and therefore it sort of launched a program to reform asylums. तो उस समय हमारे asylums किस प्रकार के थे? लगभग 20-22 थे. कुछ छोटे थे, कुछ बड़े थे, कुछ पुराने थे, कुछ नए थे. Some had a full-time doctor in charge, some had just an assistant in charge. पर लगभग सभी में स्टाफ की कमी, फंड्स की कमी, फैसिलिटीज की कमी, और ज्यादातर I would say a picture of neglect. तो जो नई स्कीम आई कि हमने सुधार करना है असाइलम्स का, the main point was we want to create large medical institutions, large mental hospitals, where a fully qualified specialist will be in charge, and this person will be a full-time doctor. And this doctor will be responsible to modernize the asylum. So to convert an asylum into a modern mental hospital. और उस टाइम ये सोचा गया कि हम शुरुआत करते हैं 5-6 ऐसे हॉस्पिटल्स के साथ, और धीरे धीरे बाकी हॉस्पिटल्स भी इसी टाइप के बनाए जाएंगे. तो शुरुआत हुई, ऐसे 5-6 हॉस्पिटल्स तैयार किए गए, जैसे कि एक रांची में, एक आगरा में, एक लाहौर में, एक मद्रास में, और एक 2 जगह और. इस समय मेरी जो खोज थी वो थोड़ी विस्तृत हो गई, क्योंकि अब मुझे पता चला कि जो ये जितने मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स थे इंडिया में, उन सब के एनुअल रिपोर्ट्स काफी आसानी के साथ उपलब्ध हैं. तो I was able to read the annual reports of these mental hospitals. Most of them were very easily available on the internet. And as I started reading, it was absolutely fascinating, because these specialists gave very detailed reports on what was happening in their hospital. किस टाइप के चेंजेस वो लाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं, कहाँ प्रॉब्लम्स आ रही हैं, उन प्रॉब्लम्स को कैसे सॉल्व कर रहे हैं, किस टाइप के ट्रीटमेंट्स वो शुरू कर रहे हैं, क्या और करना चाहते हैं. तो all of this was a very exciting field for me to read. So इस समय क्या होता है कि एक तरफ ये 5-6 हॉस्पिटल्स हैं जिनके फुल टाइम स्पेशलिस्ट डॉक्टर्स हैं, पर दूसरी तरफ आपके 10-15 not so advanced mental hospitals भी हैं. So we had these 2 different systems going on. Now, slowly, this could have led to a lot of improvement in the way hospitals were being run, but there were 2 major problems. The first major problem was that World War I broke out. So, as you know, World War I broke out in the year 1914, and it lasted for 5 years. तो हालांकि वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 हमारे देश में नहीं आया, पर हमारे देश के काफी सारे लोग वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 में उन्होंने हिस्सा लिया. तो एक तो all the soldiers, of course, thousands of soldiers went from India. But what is not known so well is that even doctors, hundreds of doctors from India were sent to the battlefront. Not just doctors, nurses, paramedics, attendants. मतलब पूरे जो मेडिकल पर्सनल है, बहुत ही बड़े तादाद में वर्ल्ड वॉर 1 में जुड़ गया. तो क्या होता है कि जब ये लोग सब निकल गए, they've gone to wherever the battles are happening across Europe and Africa. So there's a huge shortage back in India. And this shortage really hit the mental hospitals very badly. It also hit other facilities badly, but such baat ye thi कि the mental hospitals had just started to improve, and they needed some stability and they needed some leadership. तो उस समय वो एक बहुत ही critical समय था, जबकि केवल 5-6 साल के लिए ही नहीं, बट इवन 8-10 साल के लिए जो अच्छी सॉलिड स्टाफिंग थी वो गायब हो गई. तो ये एक बहुत बड़ा ड्रॉबैक था. दूसरा ड्रॉबैक ये था कि अब तक जो हॉस्पिटल्स थे वो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट के अंडर आते थे, पर 1919 में ये जो सब्जेक्ट है मेडिकल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स एक्सेट्रा, इट वाज ट्रांसफर्ड टू द प्रोविंसेस. तो एक तरफ you had, some very senior officers in the central government had taken initiative and they wanted to push this ahead. And then suddenly it is no longer in their control. It's handed over to, the government of, say, Madras, the government of Punjab, the government of Bengal, etc. तो एक तरह से मामला थोड़ा बिखर गया. पर फिर भी ऐसा नहीं है कि वहाँ मतलब मामला खत्म हो गया. Wherever there were good officers, wherever there were good doctors, wherever there were good mental hospital superintendents, a lot of achievements were made. Now, what were some of these achievements? Now, in those days, there was no sort of clear-cut cure for mental illness. What were the kind of treatments that these specialists were using? Now, what they believed is that patients need to get nutritious food, they need to get rest, they need to have some sort of activity to keep them busy, they need physical exercise, they need entertainment, and they need recreation. And this was really the kind of treatment that was offered to the patients. शायद 1930 के आसपास और तरह के ट्रीटमेंट भी आने लगे. In parts of the world, there were experiments on how to treat mental illness. And since these the specialists in India had access to what was going on in the rest of the world, so वही experiments को study करके, सीख के, उनको थोड़ा adapt करके, they started applying them in their own mental hospitals in India. So ऐसा करते करते जब हम 1947 तक पहुंचते हैं, तो हम क्या पाते हैं कि हमारा जो कानून है वो ही पुराना कानून है, उसमें कोई सुधार नहीं हुआ. हमारी जो नेशनल पॉलिसी है ही नहीं. देयर इज नो कॉमन अप्रोच. हमारा जो सिस्टम है कि हाउ शुड all these hospitals be managed, how should they be run, there is no such system. But what we did have is we had 5 or 6 mental hospitals which were fairly well run. On the other hand, we also had several mental hospitals which were really functioning in the same way as they had functioned 100 years earlier. So this is the situation at the time of independence. Now, in my book, I have one chapter called Lahore. ये चैप्टर बाकी चैप्टर से थोड़ा अलग है और मेरे लिए ये बहुत ही अहम चैप्टर है और इसलिए मैं थोड़ा सा आपको बताना चाहती हूँ इसके बारे में. जैसा कि आप जानते हैं, आजकल कहीं पर कोई हादसा होता है, कोई डिजास्टर होता है, कहीं सुनामी आती है या earthquake आता है, तो almost immediately you will have a team of psychologists going, a team of psychiatrists going to provide relief to the affected people. Now, in 1947, India was partitioned. It was probably the biggest national disaster that our society had experienced in a very long time. It was a disaster, it was a tragedy that affected lakhs of people. Thousands of people were killed, thousands of people had to move from one part of the country to another. There was so much violence, there were so many rapes, there were so many abductions. This must have had a huge effect on the mental health of the people. Unfortunately, there are no studies which explain this. So I looked for material on the subject. I asked people in the government of Punjab that, do you have any records कि जो लोग वहां से आए उनकी मानसिक स्थिति क्या थी, उनके लिए क्या किया गया? Unfortunately, there were no records. So what I did find was, at the time of partition, कुछ हमारे जो मेंटल हॉस्पिटल से, जैसे लाहौर में एक बहुत बड़ा मेंटल हॉस्पिटल था और आज भी है, और उस हॉस्पिटल में कुछ लोग ईस्ट पंजाब से दाखिल हुए थे और कुछ लोग वेस्ट पंजाब से दाखिल हुए थे. तो तो जब पार्टीशन हुआ, नेचुरली पेशेंट्स को बांटना पड़ेगा, है ना, क्योंकि उनके देश अलग अलग हो गए हैं, उनके घर अलग अलग हो गए हैं. So you had several hundred patients in Lahore who belong to India now, and it was not possible to send them across immediately because हालात ऐसे थे, there was no stability. तो उनको एक तरह से रोका गया, लाहौर में ही रोका गया. और उसी तरह इंडिया में कई ऐसे हॉस्पिटल्स थे जहाँ के जो पेशेंट्स थे उनके परिवार वाले पाकिस्तान चले गए थे, या तो ईस्ट पाकिस्तान जो कि आज बांग्लादेश है, या वेस्ट पाकिस्तान, पर वो पेशेंट्स एक तरह से फंस गए थे. और ये जो कहानी है इन फंसे हुए पेशेंट्स की, दैट इज मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स इन पाकिस्तान had Indian patients, certain number of Indian patients, and mental hospitals in India had a certain number of Pakistani patients. It was a very strange situation. And this situation actually continued for 3 years. And it was only 3 years later that the two governments were able to exchange their patients. So the way I see it is कि कितने दुख की बात है कि हमारे समाज के इतने वल्नरेबल सेक्शन को 3 साल रुकना पड़ा अपने देश लौटने के लिए, अपने परिवारों से मिलने के लिए. और शायद ये हमें बताता है that we have not been paying enough attention to people who have mental illness. We have not been giving them priority, and we have not been fair to them. We have not treated them as we have treated other citizens. So anyway, that was just about this particular chapter. अब मेरी किताब का जो सेकंड पार्ट शुरू होता है, तो जो सेकंड पार्ट है, इट इज बेस्ड ऑन व्हाट हैपेंड आफ्टर इंडिपेंडेंस. और ये कहानी का ये जो पार्ट है, ये बिल्कुल ही अलग है, क्योंकि अब हम देखते हैं कि हमारा अपना पार्लियामेंट है, हम अपने कानून बना सकते हैं, हमारी अपनी सरकार है, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट है, स्टेट गवर्नमेंट्स है, हम अपने पॉलिसी बना सकते हैं, हम अपने प्रोग्राम बना सकते हैं. So it was an opportunity to make a fresh start, to give patients the attention that they deserved. Unfortunately, जिस स्पीड से या जिस ध्यान से ये बात आगे बढ़नी चाहिए थी, वो नहीं हुई. तो उदाहरण के तौर पर हमने 1950 में ही सोचा था कि हम एक नया कानून लाएंगे टू डील विद मेंटल हेल्थ. 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1986 में जाके कानून बना और वो कानून लागू हुआ only in 1993. So we took 43 years to bring in a new law. And by that time, that new law was actually not very new. It did not contain the latest ideas. It did not contain the latest experience. So, in a way, it was a lost opportunity. So similarly, you find that there were many other lost opportunities. So what I wanted to explore further was, तो पहल अगर सरकार की तरफ से पहल नहीं हुई, अगर पार्लियामेंट की तरफ से पहल नहीं हुई, तो कहाँ से हुई पहल? और जो मैंने देखा वो ये था कि पहल वहां से हुई, not from the government, not from inside mental hospitals, but पहल हुई प्रेस से. प्रेस ने पहल ली और प्रेस की सहायता से कोर्ट्स ने पहल की. तो अराउंड 1980 ऐसे कई सारे लोग थे, कुछ लॉयर्स थे, कुछ जर्नलिस्ट थे, कुछ सोशल वर्कर्स थे, कुछ एक्टिविस्ट थे, जिन्होंने मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स में हो रही किस तरीके से चलाया जा रहा है, उनकी स्थिति क्या है, उन पे PILs फाइल किए. तो अनेकों PILs फाइल किए और फिर हाई कोर्ट्स और सुप्रीम कोर्ट्स ने ये मामला खोला, बारीकी से देखा, कमेटियां बिठाई और फिर कई मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स की स्थिति वहां से बहुत हद तक सुधरी. पर फिर ये भी हमने देखा कि चलो इस केस की वजह से ये अस्पताल सुधरा, उस केस की वजह से वो अस्पताल सुधरा, but the system as a whole was not changing. So when did that change come? That change actually started to come in 1998. So I believe, मेरा मानना है कि जो अगर हम असल में हम सोचें कि भारत में, हमारे देश में मेंटल हॉस्पिटल्स का सुधार आजादी के बाद कब शुरू हुआ है, I believe it only started in around the 1990s. That is when we had the National Human Rights Commission coming in, which promoted major changes in the way hospitals were run. The government started putting more money, more programs into these medical institutions. And finally, it was in 2017 that the Mental Healthcare Act was passed. And this act is really a huge jump from what the previous act said. And it is this act and it is today's policy and today's policymakers who now give us hope that if we really want to do something for the treatment of the mentally ill, then we have to start in a big way and we have to start today. I think I'll stop here.
Ma'am, you can continue, I think.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what to continue with, frankly.
Whatever comes to your mind, ma'am.
No, I think I'll stop. If there are any questions, I'll take those now.
Yeah, there are multiple questions. Will you
Thank you so much, ma'am, for so comprehensively sharing your thoughts and also telling us about your book. I'm pretty sure the audience is very eager to read if they haven't already. And honestly, you've made our task a little easier because you've already answered so much, and that makes the work easier for us. However, we would like to go around with our first question. Meanwhile, I would ask our audience to type the questions in the chat box. We'll be taking those alongside. So, ma'am, you talked about, how, like when you started, you talked about the inspiration of the book, and you said that there was no particular thing as such, but it was something that interested you. And when you went on to read about it, it was something you found very interesting, and then you just went with the flow and you found it very nice. So, ma'am, what was your intention to actually publish the book? Because when you started moving around it, it was more of curiosity and personal interest. But what made you write the book?
Well, the answer is really easy. As a writer, I'm always looking for an interesting subject, an interesting story. And this, I thought, was a really fascinating story. And I thought it is a story that is not just fascinating, it is also important. And I felt that I was in a position to tell that story, to bring this story to people. And that's why I really wanted to write the book.
Thank you for sharing, ma'am. So, you mentioned, the chapter that you've written on partition and how that's particularly close to you. And not just the partition, I think just talking about mental health and the conditions, I think it would have been a heavy topic to write about. So, how did you compartmentalize while writing about such a heavy topic?
You're absolutely right. When I started off, I thought this is going to be very difficult. It is going to be very depressing for me personally. And whatever I write who will want to read this? Nobody. In fact, जब भी मैं किसी को बोलती थी कि मैं इस पे काम कर रही हूँ, and they would say, "हाय, कुछ और नहीं मिला, कोई और टॉपिक नहीं मिला." It was like that. एंड एक्चुअली फिर मैंने ये सोचा कि जरूरी नहीं है कि हर गंभीर टॉपिक को गंभीरता और मतलब हेवीनेस के साथ लिखी जाए. मतलब ऐसा भी तो हो सकता है कि उसकी गंभीरता को इस ढंग से पेश किया जाए, इस ढंग से एक्सप्रेस किया जाए that it becomes easy to accept, easy to read. मेरा ये मतलब नहीं था कि लोगों को रुला के पढ़ाऊं ये किताब. It is not like that. It is written in a very easy, very sort of friendly, very simple style. और मुझे लगता है कि अगर कोई ये किताब पढ़ना शुरू कर दे तो वो पूरी करके ही छोड़ेगा. मेरा ये मानना है. अब आप पढ़ के बताइए.
Yes, ma'am, definitely. And I think all psychology students would relate here. Like the moment you tell somebody you're studying psychology, they're like, "तुम्हें कुछ और नहीं मिला पढ़ने के लिए." Gushil.
Ma'am, like you talked about, how people would actually come to you and say कि इस topic पे क्यों लिखना है, heavy topic है, थोड़ा emotional हो जाएगा, किसी और चीज पे लिख लो और भी चीजें हैं. So like, did you also come across people who would have said to you that what is the point of studying about the history of reforms? That is the past. Why do you want to write about it today? Like, what was your take on that? If you ever got some questions like this or met such people?
Actually, I didn't meet such people, but I myself used to be such a person who used to think, who cares about history? Ab jo ho gaya, so ho gaya, ab aage badho. So I think this is very common. Many people are not interested in the past and they don't want to, know ke pehle kya hua, phir kya hua, things like that. But I personally have got interested in history at a very late stage in life. Now, I know that everybody isn't interested. Maybe you're not interested. That's fine. But on the other hand, some people are. Some people want to know, what is the background? What happened before this? So I think अपनी interest है, अपनी पसंद है. और जरूरी नहीं है कि एक किताब सभी को अपील करे. तो जिसको अपील करती है, the person who is interested in, I would welcome that. Never mind about the people who find history boring. That's okay. They have other things to read.
So, Daman ma'am, I have a query too. As a person who dealt in this from a completely non-psychology background, uh, having had a perspective on this very critical aspect of education for psychology students, is there a set of thoughts that crammed your mind about what young psychology students can contribute? Every student of psychology doesn't go ahead to become a clinical psychologist or even a psychotherapist, but we have I'm sure you are aware that psychology is amongst the most popular options for youngsters today. So while doing this rigorous research, are there thoughts that came? Is there something that you would like? A large portion of students here today are from psychology background. So is there something that you would like to share? It's not a sermon, but things that came to you about how these youngsters can contribute so that they can connect to that and become relevant and feel valuable members of this fraternity too.
That's a really, really, I think, important question. And, it's very interesting that when I was reading the old annual reports from the 1920s, 1930s, तो उस टाइम के जो कुछ लोग थे, कुछ स्पेशलिस्ट थे, they were basically medical doctors, they were strongly saying that, look, we are seeing patients after they have developed symptoms, after they are in great difficulty, after their family is in great difficulty, but the root of the problem lies somewhere else. It lies in the way parents bring up their children. It lies in the way children are educated, the way teachers and the way schools interact with children. It lies in the way society deals with young people, young adults, men and women. So the roots of mental health are in our society, in our family, in our community. And that is where I think people who have an understanding of human psychology, it doesn't have to be, it's not clinical psychology, but human psychology, to understand what are positive, what is positive relationships, what is a positive relationship, what is a positive interaction that all of us must try and achieve in our own life. And that is really the foundation of our collective mental health. So I see a very, very major role for any student of psychology.
So, ma'am, while we're at the topic of backgrounds, there's a very interesting question in the chat box. I'm sort of reframing it. So, you had a very diverse background, right? You worked in development, you got your bachelor's in mathematics. So, do you think that sort of helped you to look at this from like a new perspective, or do you think this caused like it was more of a challenge because you were talking about a different field?
I think there are two ways of looking at this. If you take, say, any discipline, let's say, take a historian. Say a historian who is trained to, unearth historical facts, to analyze historical facts, etc. So if that person looks at, let me start again. Let me take all the material that I found, I put together. So supposing a historian, a trained historian looks at that material, वो उसका कुछ मतलब निकालेगी. If say a psychology student looks at the same material, वो उसका कुछ और मतलब निकालेगी. So your training influences the way you interpret the material. I think I felt I had an advantage that I was not a historian, I was not a psychiatrist, I was not a psychologist, I was a generalist. So I think I was able to look at the material how a general person will look. But that doesn't mean that the way an expert will deal with the subject, उसमें कोई मतलब कमी है, मतलब दोनों होने चाहिए, एक्सपर्ट्स को भी अपना दिमाग लगाना चाहिए और जनरलिस्ट को भी मेरे ख्याल में अपना दिमाग लगाना चाहिए. हर एक की अपनी वैल्यू है.
I would definitely agree with that, because I feel it is very important for us to know how the general public and the general population, they view mental health reforms and mental health in general. Because we being in the field, we know about a lot of things that we might feel that, some things are too common because हमने इतना पढ़ा, इतने साल पढ़ाई की है, 7 years, 5 years. But what is more important is for us to actually know कि बाकी लोग क्या जानते हैं उसके बारे में, उनका कितना इंटरेस्ट आ रहा है, क्या उनका पर्सपेक्टिव आ रहा है. So I think we are very grateful to you that you actually wrote this book and also gave us this perspective, which helped us to, view things more comprehensively.
We can still take some more questions. Can
Yes,
we take more questions, Daman ma'am?
Sure.
Yes,
Go
ma'am.
ahead, read up the questions from the chat box.
Yes, ma'am. We'll go to those questions. So, ma'am, like since you mentioned about the this specific period where we had like the 20th century, basically, where you said that that is the period when the transformation was like most rapid, and the National Human Rights Commission in 1990, it was like a major thing which kind of set the pace for it. So what, according to you, is the most significant reform? Like, is it this specific mental health commission's rights act, or is it like some other event? Like, what do you think has the most substantial influence in the entire history of mental health care?
Well, I think every 10-15 years there was a jump. There was a big jump. So I don't think I can say कि सब मिला के कौन सा वो single event था, but there were so many, well, not so many, I would say maybe there were 7 or 8 major steps forward. But in the more recent times, I think the setting up of the National Human Rights Commission was, I think, one of the most powerful steps.
Okay, ma'am. So, ma'am, we have this one question in the chat box where they're basically asking us that by looking at the history, do you feel that it was more about lack of facilities and lack of awareness, or there were more positive takeaways if you look at it in like whole perspective?
I feel that it was lack of importance given, lack of importance given by our planners, our MPs, our government. Because I know that we have hundreds of problems, but this is one problem which was neglected to such a great extent. I don't know if any other problem in our country has been neglected to this extent. So it was basically not considered. These people were mentally ill people in India were not considered important enough to get the attention of the government. I mean, I feel if you really want to, then resources can be found, facilities can be found, infrastructure can be created. But if you're basically not interested, then all these things don't happen.
Yes, ma'am, I think I definitely agree. And in the recent times also, we see few of these problems still persisting, although we feel that a lot of progress has been made compared to the earlier times. So,
Especially, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Panil.
I was saying, especially because of the pandemic, there is a new found emphasis on mental health and mental illness. So there's a question, ma'am, that says that you talked about the wounds of colonization and partition, and you feel that they were never really talked about, like the psychological impact of those things. So, I feel like people have seen their grandparents who also don't talk about that part of their lives. And so when you were researching all of this, is there something that you found particularly distressing, that maybe even to a point that you were sort of feeling a little less motivated to go ahead with writing about it?
No, I was actually nothing affected my motivation, because the more I discovered, the more I wanted to keep on at it. In fact, I didn't feel at all disheartened while writing this. I wrote it, it sounds very strange, but I wrote it very cheerfully. I was quite cheerful throughout. And the book actually took me a good maybe 4 years to write. So I must say, you can ask my family. Nobody found me in a sad and dejected frame of mind. I was quite happy writing this.
All right. And if there's a big takeaway that you think that anyone can take from this book, what would you say that is?
That is a very difficult question. I think the takeaway is that now is the time. Now is the time for that. There were a lot of missed opportunities, there were a lot of wrong decisions, there was a lot of neglect. But we have the opportunity now, today. We have the right law, we have the right policy, we have the institutions, we have the people, we have the resources, and it is really up to society to take initiative, to take charge, to demand better services, to demand more facilities. So I think that is the takeaway.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing, ma'am.
There is another question by Priyanshi. So Priyanshi is one of our alumni who's pursuing her master's in development studies from Ambedkar University. Thank you, Priyanshi, for being here. Could you please take that question? And Principal ma'am has also joined us. Welcome, ma'am. The coordinator of IQAC, Dr. Lokesh Gupta, is also here. So thank you all of you for being here. Can we take Priyanshi's question, please?
Yes, ma'am. So Priyanshi is asking that, ma'am, you talked about how there was no national policy up till very recently about mental health. Her query is that since the neoliberal reform, state intervention in all sectors is curtailed, including healthcare funding with squeezed budgetary allocation. And how can we address these issues of public healthcare, both mental and physical? Anyways.
That's a very large question. But first of all, I don't agree that the funding has come down since liberalization. I would say that since the days of liberalization, actually the options have opened up. I do agree that this may have caused some setback to public facilities, but the entry of private healthcare in numerous areas has actually released government resources, government personnel to deal with the most critical areas where they are required. So I think the overall expansion of infrastructure and expansion of resources, it has taken place over the last 20 years or so. And actually, I think what is also particularly significant is it is through globalization that we have realized, that we have accepted that we need to do more. As long as our borders were closed, as long as our minds were closed, as long as we said that, we don't care what goes on in the rest of the world, we are going to run our country our own way. I think we neglected, that is part of the neglect. It is only when we sat in the community of nations, and we found that other countries are doing much better, especially in mental health, than we are. And that is when we started pulling up our socks. So I think there's a lot to be said for globalization. There is a lot to be said for liberalization in this context.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering so beautifully. And we have the principal, Dr. Harpreet Kaur, also with us. Ma'am, we would like you to address the audience.
1 second, Rushil. So I just would like to invite Principal Ma'am. So Dr. Harpreet Kaur is a gold medalist in her master's, and she has a teaching experience of almost 3 decades. She has reviewed a number of books. She's contributed to several book chapters. She has published 39 papers in national and international journals. She has presented a number of papers in national and international conferences, notably at Stanford University, California, University of Ottawa, Canada, and Warsaw School of Economics in Poland. And ma'am is a true inspiration to many who foresee themselves excelling in academics. She's also been awarded the Commonwealth Innovation Award in 2021, and the Great Indian Teachers Award in 2021, and the Great Indian Women's Award in 2021. Ma'am, please do address the audience.
Yeah. Good evening, all. I could not join you earlier, but yes, I listened to a little bit of talk of Daman Singh, and I was really inspired by it. And also, of course, Harinder Sandhu ma'am and entire Department of Psychology, and also my students who are all here, especially Gurshil and Parmeet, who have really coordinated and done this job very well. Yes, the topic I believe is very interesting, and I think the young students must listen to such things to actually be motivated and understand that sometimes the problem is not there, and we create problem ourselves. I think most of the psychological problems are created by our own selves. It is our own thinking, and I think Ms. Daman Singh has really explained very well that how to be optimistic about the things. And this mental health emergency which is there in India especially, and the President of India has also addressed it and called that the youth is actually going into depression, and they are affected by these disorders. So we must come out of it, and a lot needs to be done. And those things which needs to be done starts, of course, at the level of government, but at the individual level, I think this is what we want to give to our students, that how to come out of it and how to really contain it at the very, very early stage, because otherwise it blows out of proportion. And I think you have understood the crux of it. I'm so happy that Ms. Daman Singh has really spared time, and she has enlightened our students. And so I also thank IQAC, which is Dr. Lokesh, and the entire psychology department, and Harinder Sandhu. And Dr. Sandhu has been doing quite a lot for the students, along with her team, of course. And all of us really want that our students should be positive citizens, and positive and vibrant. And this positivity will come from within. It is not something which can be imposed. You have to find reasons to be happy and positive. And so this is what we want to really disseminate to the students through addresses like this. And so once again, I thank the entire team for a very enlightening lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. These events would not be possible without your constant support. Now, I would like to kindly invite Dr. Lokesh sir to please address the audience. He's the coordinator of the IQAC of our college.
Thank you, Parneet. Thank you. Madam Principal, Madam Daman Singh, Madam Harinder Sandhu, Madam Pranita Gaud, और गरिमा कुमार, कुछ अंधेरों में उजालों की तलाश मैडम दमन सिंह कर रही थी. अब मैं अपने लिटरेचर वाले अंदाज में थोड़ा सा बोलने की कोशिश करूंगा कि कुछ लोग होते हैं जो अंधेरे में उजाले करते हैं, जिनके काम उनको खुद नहीं पता होता कि वो कहाँ ले जाएंगे काम को, लेकिन वो सच में इतने अंधेरे होते हैं, वहाँ एक काम निकाल कर लेकर आते हैं और वो न जाने कितनी कितनी दूर तक उनकी रोशनियां जाती है, कहाँ कहाँ तक रोशनियां पहुंचती है। एक शब्द उर्दू का और है रोशनाई, उर्दू का एक शब्द है रोशनाई। वो स्याही के लिए इस्तेमाल करते हैं हम, लेखन के लिए इस्तेमाल करते हैं। तो जो ये लेखन है सच में रोशनी फैलाने वाला लेखन है, बिल्कुल अंधेरे। अब मैडम ने जिस तरह से मेंटल हेल्थ पर बताया कि कोई काम ही नहीं था किसी तरह का, और एक बेचारगी थी, 86 के आसपास कोई कानून बना, 93 में इम्प्लीमेंट हुआ, कोई चीज है कब बनेगी कब नहीं बनेगी, एक बड़ी सी बेचारगी हमें दिखाई देती है इन चीजों पर। और मैं अक्सर ये कहता हूँ कि हमें अपना सबको, हम सबको कहीं ना कहीं इस तरह की, जैसे मैडम दमन सिंह को कुछ चीजें दिखाई दी, ऐसे और बहुत सारे एरियाज है जिन पर काम करने के लिए। ये कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि हम एक पर्टिकुलर सेशन, आपके आसपास आप देखोगे तो आपको इन सारी चीजें आपको दिखाई दे जाएंगी कुछ ना कुछ, आपके घर के आसपास, आपके गली के आसपास, आपके शहर में, आपके कॉलेज में भी कुछ ऐसी चीजें हो सकती हैं कि जहां हम, जिसकी ओर अभी हम नहीं सोच रहे हो, और कुछ बच्चे जिनकी ओर अभी शायद इंडिकेट भी नहीं कर रहे हो। तो वो चीजें आप जब धीरे धीरे लेकर आओगे तो उन उन उनके उजालों की तरफ भी हम जा सकते हैं, उन अंधेरों को हम दूर कर सकते हैं। तो हमें बेसिकली आज का जो लेसन मैडम से मैंने शुरू से ही सुना है, गाड़ी चलाते हुए भी सुना और घर पर आकर भी सुना, तो जो मुझे सीख मिली, मुझे तो यही मिली कि मुझे कुछ उजालों की और तलाश करनी चाहिए, कि कुछ जो अंधेरे हैं उनको और दूर करने चाहिए हमें। और बहुत अंधेरे अभी बाकी हैं। अभी हम 75 साल का आज़ादी का पर्व तो मना रहे हैं, लेकिन 75 साल में अभी न जाने कितने और 75 अंधेरे बाकी अभी चल रहे हैं हमारे। हमें उन अंधेरों को भी दूर करना है। हमें विमेन स्टडीज की बात करनी है, हमें डिसेबिलिटी स्टडीज की बात करनी है, हमें डिस्कोर्सेज की बात करनी है। हमें न जाने कितने, अभी हम दिल्ली मेट्रो शहर में बैठकर बात कर रहे हैं, दिल्ली के बाहर आप एनसीआर में जाकर देखिए क्या हालात हैं, क्या एजुकेशन सिस्टम है, क्या पॉलिसीज वहाँ पर इम्प्लीमेंट होती है, और किस तरह का अभी एक रूढ़िवादी सोच काम करती है। इवन लड़कियों के पढ़ने पढ़ाने के जो पहरे हैं वहाँ पर, उनके पहनने ओढ़ने के जो पहरे वहाँ पर लगा दिए जाते हैं, आप जरा उनको सोचिए। तो वो ऐसा नहीं है कि चीज़ें ठीक है, दिल्ली में भी, दिल्ली के बाहर तो बहुत बुरे हालात हैं। और जिस तरह के इंटीरियर से हम लोग निकल कर आते हैं, गाँव से हम लोग निकल कर आते हैं, वहाँ पर तो बहुत सोचने समझने वाली बात है कि लड़कियां 10वीं पढ़ ली तो बस समझ लो कि उन्होंने सब कुछ पढ़ लिया, यही एक सोच लेकर लोग बैठे होते हैं। तो आप सोच सकते हैं कि वहाँ ग्रेजुएशन की हुई लड़की या आपको पीजी की हुई लड़की, वहाँ शायद ही आपको कोई गांव में एक या दो लड़की दिखाई दे जाए। तो आपको अभी ये तलाश करनी है। और हम लोग, बहुत सारे लोग एक बात कहते हैं, जैसे मैंने एक और बात सीखी यहाँ पर, कि हम अपने काम के लिए अगर दूर दराज के इलाकों में जा सके तो जाना चाहिए हमें। जैसे मैडम ने बताया कि लाहौर का एक बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग चैप्टर का जिक्र किया, हमें अगर दूर जाकर काम करना पड़ता है तो हमें जाना चाहिए। आपके एक के प्रयास से न जाने कितनी जिंदगियां संवर सकती हैं, कितनी जिंदगियों में उजाले आ सकते हैं। आप इंटीरियर में जाइए, आप गांव में काम करिए, आप छोटा सा एक इनिशिएटिव लेंगे वहां, उस इनिशिएटिव से कई जिंदगियां, कई जनरेशन सुधर जाएंगी वहां पर। तो हम ये ना सोच कर बैठे और अपनी एजुकेशन लें कि हमें दिल्ली में ही काम करना है, हमें मेट्रोज में बैठना है, हम बड़े घरों में बैठकर काम करना है, अच्छी कुर्सी पर बैठकर काम करना है। हमें हमें उन इलाकों में, हमें हमें धूप में तपना भी है, हम उन इलाकों में जाना है जहां तक अभी लोग नहीं पहुंचे हैं। ऐसे बहुत इलाके हिंदुस्तान के अंदर है, पूरी दुनिया के अंदर इस तरह के बहुत इलाके हैं। बहुत धन्यवाद मैडम संधू कि आपने इस तरह का लेक्चर आयोजित किया साइकोलॉजी एसोसिएशन की ओर से। बहुत धन्यवाद डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ साइकोलॉजी को, मैडम प्रिंसिपल को, कि आपने इस तरह के कार्यक्रमों को आयोजन करने की स्वीकृति प्रदान की। और बच्चों का विशेषकर कि आप जिस खूबसूरती के साथ आप कार्यक्रम आयोजित कर रहे हैं, एक मैच्योर कार्यक्रम आयोजित कर रहे हैं, कहीं इस तरह का लग नहीं रहा कि हम कि बच्चों की कोई अनट्रेंड बच्चे बैठे हुए, सब ट्रेंड बच्चे हैं। और एक शिक्षण होता है, एक प्रशिक्षण होता है, बच्चे शिक्षण के साथ साथ पूरा प्रशिक्षण के साथ बैठे हुए हैं, ट्रेनिंग है इनकी पूरी की पूरी। तो हम अक्सर ये कहते हैं एजुकेशन सिस्टम में कि हायर एजुकेशन में ट्रेनिंग नहीं होती, लेकिन हायर एजुकेशन में ट्रेनिंग होती है, और ये ट्रेनिंग का पार्ट है। आप इस ट्रेनिंग के पार्ट रहे हो। जो हमने कुछ कार्यक्रम शुरू किए हैं वो एक तरह की ट्रेनिंग्स के ही पार्ट हैं। तो आप सब उस ट्रेनिंग में रहें और आगे करते रहें और बहुत खूब करते रहें। आने वाले समय में आपको जनरेशन याद करेगी, आप इस दौर को याद करोगे कि आपने महाविद्यालय के लिए, कॉलेज के लिए आपने किस तरह से कुछ चीजें खड़ी की थी, और आप उसकी नींव थे, आप उसके आधार रहे कॉलेज के अंदर। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आप सबका, सुनने के लिए, मौका देने के लिए बहुत धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू सो मच सर। हर बार की तरह आपने इतने अच्छे से मतलब पूरे इवेंट को कहते हैं ना कि 4 चांद लगाते एकदम लास्ट में देके, बिल्कुल वैसे ही किया है। एंड थैंक यू सो मच। नाउ आई वुड लाइक टू रिक्वेस्ट हरिंदर मैम टू प्लीज स्पीक।
There is nothing for me to say as such, but I just want to thank specifically our alumni who are here. There are colleagues from other colleges. There are colleagues from Daulatram College. There are colleagues from other colleges, and there are a lot of our alumni who are present from different years. There is Kamakshi, there is Himakshi, there is Priyanshi. There are many other alumni, and I want to thank all those alumni for being here and being a part of this journey. Thank you so much, Daman ma'am, for taking out time. And thank you, Principal Ma'am and Lokesh sir, and Dr. Pranita, and my co-convener, Dr. Garima. And thank you, students. Thank you all for being here and being a part of these concluding celebrations, if we call the word, use the word celebrations of the Mental Health Awareness Month. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you can have a look at the chat box. It is just filled with